JD Power partners with Palantir, data, gold rush of the modern era. Bain calls the initial round of Stellantis concessions trash. Where are we going with this UAW talk? And AutoNation launches micro-leasing. Is this the future of auto ownership? Today on the Autovate podcast. There's my buddy, Cliff Banks. Welcome back to the Autovate podcast. This week, we got a bunch of stuff to talk about. I'm happy to have you back. I know you've been traveling. You had a red-eye flight. You're always bouncing around the country. While we've got you pinned down, I do want to get into this JD Power and Palantir partnership. It's pretty interesting because JD Power is known for their data mining. They've been doing it for years, and now Palantir steps in with some of their AI. It's kind of like data on top of data. We're getting really into the nitty-gritty of consumer needs and desires.
Palantir is one of the more mysterious and fascinating companies in the tech space. It goes back, I think it was founded in 2003. Its first round of institutional capital came from a CIA-backed venture capital firm. So it's really been one of these companies that operated not under the radar, but behind a wall. So it's hard to know what Palantir has actually been doing because it's been working with defense companies and intelligence agencies, both in the U.S. and around the world. Side story here, my sister-in-law was one of the first 50 employees at Palantir. And several years ago, we speculated and kind of mapped out a potential automotive play for Palantir. But at the time, it was really focused on defense. Fast forward to now, and it's making a big play in the corporate space. It has to grow. It's launched an IPO and needs to make a strong play in the business world. And it's doing that. Just recently, they announced that they are partnering with JD Power to apply, I guess, AI to JD Power's data.
The things they're talking about doing, repair analytics, intelligent alerts. If you've got a car that needs service, the dealership's going to kind of know about it. They're going to know that my car is due, that I'm going to get text messages.
Yes.
EV battery health analytics, digital journey optimization, just a few of the topics that they're digging into.
What Palantir brings to the table is the ability to leverage the large language model and provide parameters that it only uses JD Power data. So it's not going outside of the JD Power data into the internet. I mean, think about it. ChatGPT was trained on the 2021 data. However, if it's using JD Power data, it's up to date in real time. So I think there's some fascinating things that they can do. And certainly JD Power is not going to be their only automotive client. I would bet that they already are working on relationships with some of the manufacturers and I think some of the larger dealer groups.
Well, I was going to ask you, how do you see this now playing out? Is this information, this data that they're gathering, do you see that being sold to dealerships? Do you see that data being sold to OEMs?
Sure. Well, they already sell their power information network data, which is data that they take directly from the DMS, sales data, transactional data, and they provide it to OEMs and dealers. Look, there's going to be some guardrails in terms of what they can provide or sell. This will be interesting to see how this plays out. Palantir is a publicly traded company, and there's some analysts saying that it's the Mark Messier of AI in this world.
Hold on, Cliff, I'm sorry. I think you're confusing a few sports here. Mark Messier, up in your neck of the woods.
You're right. You're Lionel Messi. Lionel Messi.
Popular hockey player.
Messi. It's that red eye. You're right.
It's okay.
You're right. Lionel Messi.
It's just your geography. It's your geography.
That's
Detroit,
right.
True. Lots more hockey going on.
That's true.
Lionel Messi.
Is true.
Either way you go, these are wildly popular and successful athletes.
Yes,
but
right. It'll be fun to watch to see how Palantir plays and moves forward in the automotive space.
Yeah, and from the consumer point of view, it's interesting to me that, sure, I could shop for a vehicle and I might get some ads that say, hey, you're looking at a vehicle, maybe you'll like a Ford Fiesta, or maybe you'll like, but now this technology is going to be so bullseye targeted to know that I want the next Toyota 4Runner, the new generation, whenever that comes out, I want that. I want it in four-wheel drive. I want it in, let's say, black. They're going to know exactly the trim level, and those ads are going to be aimed right squarely at me. That's what this is going to do, right?
listen, I've been around long enough to have seen a lot of these prognostications not work out. And, I think Palantir too, as a company, they really have to find a way to grow revenue and profitability. I think where it's trading at right now, it's a little over its skis probably in terms
Let
of,
me cancel my
I
buy
think
order.
yeah, I mean, it needs to get, well, I don't know if I would do that, but, I'm not offering stock advice here, but it really should see growth of 30% to be able to justify where it's trading at right now. And I think its growth is at 13 to 15%.
Okay.
But again, a lot of things are in the works right now with them in the corporate world. So I think we'll see a lot more announcements forthcoming from them.
And it seems to me, I'm no expert, you are, but it seems to me that we are closer than ever to this idea of super targeted AI-driven marketing and advertising, which we'll wait to see. Let's move things along, Cliff, a little bit, if you don't mind.
Sure.
I want to take a look at this soundbite from the UAW president, Sean Fain. If you haven't seen it already, take a look.
When we get things like this from the company, and they want to sit there and talk about they're not asking for concessions or looking for concessions, everything they're looking for in this document is about concessions. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do with their proposal. I'm going to file it in its proper place, because that's where it belongs, the trash, because that's what it is.
So, Cliff, I know you've seen that clip. Is this just chest pounding? Is this simply bravado? Or is Fain really serious about the strong talk he's using in a clip like that?
Well, I will say this. There is a growing concern, and there's been concern from the beginning after he was elected about his, and I don't want to be unkind here, but perceived lack of experience in negotiating. And he has cleaned house at UAW headquarters and brought in his team. There's some things that are different. I mean, he's obviously dispensed with any of the civil niceties traditionally that have been part of the UAW manufacturer talks, the ceremonial shaking of the hands. He threw the initial list of concessions from Stellantis in the trash. He's being increasingly more hostile, not so much in tone, but in what he's saying about the manufacturers. And the question is whether he's putting himself into a corner, which he will not be able to get out of. He is making some big promises to the union rank and file that, hey, we're following this through. We're going to go, we're going to fight hard.
It's a complex issue, and both sides really have a case. You've got record profits on the sales side, but you've got the workers saying, hey, we need a piece of that. But when you really look into it, the labor is the most expensive part of building these vehicles. But without the labor, you've got nothing. I would not want to be in the room trying to come to an agreement on this. It just seems impossible to make either side happy, and that's why you say, and most people that I've been reading up on say, a strike looks increasingly inevitable.
Yeah, and they have the money. The UAW's fortified its finances over the recent months, so I think it can buckle down, and you're looking at a possible 12 to 15 week where they have the funding to pay significant wage to their workers who are on strike. So yeah, I think certainly seems like we're heading down that path. And like you said, the manufacturers, I mean, they're in a tough spot too. Mm-hmm. The battery factories that are going up, I mean, there's one that's operational right now, and we're looking at another 9 or 10 just here in the U.S. You got the complication with the Canadian Unifor Union with those negotiations starting. So a lot of complexity, staked out positions that both sides need to fight for.
It's going to affect a lot of people, so we'll be listening in on all of that. Switch gears again. AutoNation introducing this micro-lease program where consumers can lease a vehicle for 6 months, maybe pay something like $2,400 up front, have an $820 a month lease payment with maintenance included, but then you're done? Can you help me better understand how this micro lease program works? Typically, it's still, 3, 4, 5 years, but now they're talking 6 months to 12 months. How does that benefit the dealer? How does that benefit the consumer?
Well, it's a new take on vehicle ownership. So instead of actually owning the vehicle, it's a month-to-month subscription, or it's a 6-month subscription. AutoNation launched this in California with its Volkswagen platform. Volvo also has one. There's a lot of debate between the California Dealers Association and the manufacturers as to how these programs were violating the state franchise laws in California. They came to an agreement, I think, last year. So now we're seeing some of these things play out. Now, we were writing about these programs on the Banks report. I went through each of them. Most dealer groups that were experimenting with these subscription-based models determined that it just didn't pencil for either the customer or the dealer. And to your point, the Volkswagen one that AutoNation has launched, it's questionable. You think about paying, you pay that upfront fee for a 6-month lease.
Yeah, where does that
you have
go?
to pay that fee again.
Right,
exactly.
I want to build some kind of equity in a large purchase like
you would
that.
think, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think there's a very niche part of the market which, that subscription or micro-lease might work. But my guess is over time, it moves from being a new vehicle play to more of a used vehicle play. But the problem is the residual values or the valuation on those vehicles take such a huge hit in that first year.
It kind of sounds to me a little bit, and I'm reminded of this because you were telling me about your cell phone, having to get a new cell phone and what a labored process that was. It kind of reminds me a little bit about how we, use our cell phones these days. I'm constantly paying for this because the new model comes out and I'm on the hook again for paying for another phone. A lot of people lease their phones. A lot of people sort of rent them. It feels a little bit like that. Here's the new thing. Every 6 months, every year, you get a new thing, and you're constantly paying for. Most of us need a car. So
yeah, your phone is what, $500 to $1,000,
right?
Maybe more, a little bit more. Vehicle is
significantly more,
substantially higher. So we might get there a little bit easier with electric vehicles, but again, we have the whole component or the whole conversation around the battery. I think that's on the EV side. In terms of vehicle valuations, that's going to be one of the tougher questions or difficult questions to answer.
Okay. Well, you're taking me down an exit ramp that actually we were going to talk about anyway. And did you happen to see Jim Farley, president of Ford, and his F-150 Lightning road trip? Did you read about any of that and how that went for him?
Oh, sure. Yeah. We were tracking that. I was in Las Vegas for the Ford National Dealer Meeting, which is where he was going. He was coming from Silicon Valley, driving to Las Vegas and making stops along the way. So, yeah, I think there were some challenges on the charging side too. Yeah. For him.
From what I read, it seemed to be a pretty successful trip, but he learned what many people who own EVs complain about, and that is the charging. For a long time, the charging was sold to people as like, oh, you know what? You got to stop for bathroom breaks. You got to stop for lunch anyway. So you might as well stop for a half hour to an hour, plug in, and you'll be fine. But his challenges were it just didn't charge fast enough because right now Ford, as it stands, isn't on the supercharger network. That's about to change. But for his trip, he was charging about 40% in 40 minutes, which is a bit of a pain point for EV adoption. And it's interesting to see, a CEO of a big company go through that.
Well, I think, this whole charging network question, they're not going to be able to tap into that Tesla national charging network for a while. So, if you're looking to buy an EV as a customer, are you going to wait to buy that EV until you have access to that network? I in Vegas talking to the dealers, still a lot of skepticism. They're between a rock and a hard place.
Yeah.
Government is really pushing it, and, it takes a lot of money, and they're building really startups. People are talking about Ford losing $4.5 billion this year on its EV play. Well, look, Tesla was losing probably similar amounts in its early years as they were building out their play. But the one I'm paying really close attention to is General Motors. They're launching the Equinox. They've already rolled out the Trailblazer, and they have the Silverado coming. Those things have to hit. If they don't, what does that do to the leadership? What position does that put Mary Barra in? I think this automotive world at the top could look a little different going into next year. But again, these folks are trying. I mean, we can sit back and throw rocks at the strategies that they're doing, but it's ridiculous. The government's forcing it.
So the government's pushing it, and you're right. There are definitely programs and incentives and things to
Sure.
move this ball down the field. But if those mandates or if that push wasn't in place, I feel like we'd still be sitting on the ICE vehicle train and not going forward at all, because financially, as we've seen, it's not playing out to the benefit of the people that are building these vehicles. So I don't know what the right answer is. If I did, boy, I'd be in a much better position, right? But I kind of agree with the forceful move forward. Otherwise,
Sure.
we don't progress.
True. But again, let's go back to UAW. You're sitting there thinking, okay, what about my
Yeah.
job? My job is going to be lost. And I'm speaking hypothetically, and I'm looking at Ford losing $4.5 billion. And I'm going, why are you doing this?
Right.
So you're right. I mean, things like this don't happen without the government mandating or pushing. And there's just going to be pain, and we can't get away from it. And there's going to be winners and losers. And this automotive space is going to look a lot different probably in 5-10 years.
Hey, at the end of all this, you know what I want, Cliff? All I really want is that flying car that the Jetsons promised me 40 years ago. I'm ready for it. I want to be 70 years old. I want to get into my electric flying car. I want to push a button and I want to lay back and have it take me wherever I want to go. Who knows? Hopefully we'll get there. We want to remind everybody to please like, subscribe, do all those things for us. If you haven't gotten the Autovate newsletter yet, please subscribe and sign up for that. There's a lot of great information in there. And if you haven't looked into the Autovate convention coming up December 6th through the 8th, I think you have to do it now, because we're starting to book up some spots. It's a great convention at the Scottsdale Montelucia Resort. Beautiful place, Cliff.
Scottsdale in early December, hard to beat. We're putting together the agenda. We already have some of the speakers on the website, autovate.org. You can register. You can book your hotel room. It's a passion of mine. We launched it 7 years ago and are very, I think, grateful but proud of what we're building with that event and the ancillary products like this podcast and our newsletter. So join the conversation.
Be in the room where it happens. I always like to say that. I totally ripped that off from the Hamilton Broadway, but I think it just perfectly fits. Thank you once again, everybody, for joining us on the Autovate podcast. Myself, Nick Calderone, Cliff Banks. We'll see you here on the next episode.